With this video, I will create a user's maintenance module. This module will list all users and have the ability to edit and delete users. It will also allow administrators to elevate users to moderators and admins. Hi, I'm Ben Plessier and, like you, a fervent user of Wappler. In Wappler, I start where I left off in video 9 where I discussed password reset. In the previous videos, I started by creating a form on the front end. For the admin module, I will start with the back end. As you will see, this will make the front development a lot easier. In the Workflows panel, under API, I create a new folder named Admin. This is where I will place all of the API actions that are used in the admin module. The first lot of API actions will refer to the user page. Hence I create a folder inside the admin folder called Users. Inside the Users folder, I create 4 API actions. I name the actions, Create, Read, Update, and Delete. It is not necessary to use these names, you can name the actions anything that you are comfortable with. Now that we have created the API actions, I'll add the execution steps for each of the API actions. The first API action creates a new user. This is similar to the registration API action, and if you have been following the videos, these steps will be familiar to you. I start with database actions and database insert. In the properties panel, I adjust the name and click on update options. In the dialog, I select the users table. This populates the dialog with the fields and their values. These values have been suggested by Wappler. I accept the values and click the OK button. I now select Input and Post. Here I see the input values that were suggested by Wappler. These values need a bit of tweaking. This will make life a lot easier when we create the input forms on the front end. Choosing the first post variable, I add a name for the linked field. This is the form input field. Then I add a validation rule and text that will appear in the form label. I repeat this for each of the other post variables. For the email variable, I add an extra validation rule. The last 3 variables will have a fixed value that I will create in the insert database step. These variables do not appear in the input form, so I delete them. We do need an extra variable. This is for the password confirm input. I create the variable and treat it in the same manner as the other variables. For the confirm password field, I add an extra validation rule. This is to ensure that both password fields read the same. In the next step I change the email address as entered by the user, to lowercase. This was also done in previous videos in this playlist. But hey! This needs to be done before the email address is stored in the database. I therefore right-click Execute and add the action before the database action. I select Core Actions and Set Value. In the Properties panel, I enter the name of the value and use the Dynamic Data Picker to select the email POSI input. I then click on the Formatter button, select Text and convert to lowercase. Save the inputs and we are done with the conversion step. Well, you may ask, why did Ben create the database before the email conversion step? This is because the email conversion step requires a post input. And as we have seen, these inputs are automatically created by Wappler when I created the insert step. Now for the last step in the API action. Actually, this is to be the second step. I right-click the Set Value step to ensure the correct position of this step. In the pop-up I select Validation and Validate Data. In the Properties panel, I open the Validate Options panel. I create a new field and choose the formatted email as the expression. In the Properties panel, I enter the name of the linked field. The validation rule implies that the email address should not already exist in the database. I add the relevant table and associated field. I could change the error message, but have decided to leave this as is. The last part is to change the input values in the database action. The value for the email field is changed to the formatted email. The value for the password field is a hashed version of the password. This is done by selecting the Formatter button, choosing cryptographic and SHA 256. The salt is the same as in previous videos. It is named moderators. The group field gets a value of 1. The status gets a value of 0. The created field gets a value of now. Save the database action and we are done with the Create API action. The next API action is the read function. In the JSON file, I right-click on Execute. Here I add a new action and choose Database Actions. As I explained in the previous video, the read function is translated as query in Wappler. I have a choice of 4 queries. In this case, I choose the first query because it is not a query that returns a single result, nor will it be paged or customized. In the Properties panel, I change the name to be more specific. We want to see the results of the query on the front end, so I leave Output selected. I also accept the other default settings. Then I open the Query Builder. Here I choose the database table. I will need to show all of the fields. Adding the table name will create a wildcard in the Columns tab. At this stage, I do not want to apply any conditions. This will be discussed in a later video. All that is left is to apply sorting rules. When done, click OK, and that is it for the read function. Now for the update function. I follow the same procedure as with the previous 2 functions. Create a new action and choose Database Actions. This time this will be an update function. It will be a single record update, so I choose the first of the 2 options. In the Properties panel, I specify the name and select Update Options. Here I choose the database table. There are 2 fields that will not be updated using this function, so I remove them. The first is the password field and the second is the created field. So that the correct record is updated, I add the condition that the user ID in the database is the same as the posted user ID. As with the create function, Wappler has suggested the input values for each field. Like the create function, I need to tweak these values in the input posts section. A bit boring to see me go through each one, I will therefore speed the video up. For the group field, I have chosen to show this as a select menu so that the group can be selected. For the status, I have chosen a checkbox. For the user ID, I have not entered a value for the label. This is because the ID will be hidden. Then we need an email format step and a validation step preceding the database action. You already know how to do this, so I will again speed the video up while I go through the motions and spare you my voice. And we are ready for the last function. This is a matter of creating a delete database action with a condition that the user ID has the same value as the input post value. You already know how to do most of this. The main difference is that I have to enter the input post value because it is not automatically entered by Wappler. Save all of the files and close them. And that is it for the server actions. Now to use these functions on the front end. I start with the admin layout page. Here I add the notifications component by right-clicking App and choosing Components and Notifications. I adjust the name of the ID, although this is not a requirement. I will be using the notifications throughout the admin module, and by placing it in the layout page rather than in the users page, we'll make it generally available. I now go to the admin folder and select the users page. Inside this page I will be using the server-side actions that I previously created. The manner that they will be used differs on the function of the action. The create, update and delete functions will be used within a form. These are called post functions. Read, which is a get function, needs to be expressly placed in the page. I right-click on App and in the pop-up, I select Data and Server Connect. I give the ID a recognizable name. The Server Connect needs to know the server action to which it is tied. Here I select Admin Users Read function. In this next step, I am going to create a modal dialog that will house the Add New User form. I right-click the container and select After, Dynamic Modal. The modal gets a recognizable ID. I also give the fade effect a tick. For the modal heading, I choose a light text color with a blue background. The title is changed to Add User. I remove the paragraph inside the modal body and replace it with the Add User form. This is done by right-clicking the modal body tag. In the pop-up I choose Inside and Generators. Here I select the form generator. In the form generator dialog, I select the user's create function. There is nothing to populate. I change the form to a vertical form. This is a matter of choice and it could have been left as a horizontal form. I leave the other options at their default settings. A submit button has been added to the form input fields. Because the form is inside a modal, I can use the button that is already shown in the modal footer. I delete it from the form. I click OK and the form appears in the body of the modal. The form gets a recognizable ID. When the form is submitted, the user needs to be notified if the action was successful or not. With the next part, I will only show the successful submission of the form. Unsuccessful submissions follow the same procedure. With the form still selected, I scroll down to Dynamic Events. In the pop-up, I select Server Connect, and in the menu I choose Success. For the action, I close the modal. Show a message. Reload the database query to cater for the new user. The next step is to add validation to the form inputs. This is very similar to what we have seen to date, so I will speed the video up. This shows a problem that we are faced with. As you know, an ID must be unique within a page. Wappler usually adds INP_ in front of the name of the form input. With 2 more forms to add to this page, we would have 3 instances of the same ID. This problem is easily solved at this stage of the development. For this I go to the search panel. Here I add the name of the current page. Then I enter the search pattern and the pattern that should replace it. To make sure that the selection is correct, I click on Find All. Satisfied that this is what I want, I click on Replace All. Answer the affirmative to a couple of warning messages. Presto, the IDs have changed accordingly. Now for the Submit button. Well, actually it is not a real Submit button because it resides outside of the form element. Instead it is just a default button that needs to be instructed to submit the form when clicked on. I change the button text. Then I scroll down to Dynamic Events. Do I add a mouse on click event? For the action, I choose to submit the form. As you know, a modal is hidden by default. To show the modal, I want to add a button after the page heading. To do this, I select the heading and insert after the button. I change the button text to read, Add User. The button gets a unique ID. And a bit of styling. Then I scroll down to Dynamic Events and add a mouse on click event. For the action, show the modal. As a last adjustment, I create a bit of space between the button and the heading and we are done with the create part of the user's page. Now for the read function. Here I want to list all of the users. Then when I click on a user, I want to see the details. In other words, this is a master detail setup. I start with a new row after the existing row. I create a bit of space between the rows. Inside the row, I add 2 columns. Inside the first column, I scroll down to Generators and select the table generator. In the pop-up dialog, I select to populate the table with data from the Server Connect data source. I leave the table type as horizontal. I select responsive, stripe, hover and thought that I had also selected small. Never mind. The table shows all of the available fields. But I only want the first name, last name and email fields, so I delete the rest. When done, I save the table and see the result in the page. There is just the one entry. This is the one that I created back in video 7 where I discussed user registration. As I said, I want to be able to choose a user and be able to see the other details in the second column. This requires a filter data source. For this I select Server Connect and add after, data and data detail. I change the ID to a recognizable value. For the data source, I select the Server Connect query. The key is set to the data detail user ID. Now we are ready to create a table that contains the data detail. Inside the second column, I go to Generators and select the table generator once again. This time the table is populated with the data from the data detail. The table type is set to vertical and responsive. I leave all of the fields and click OK. Here we see a table with the database table fields as headings, and empty cells where the data from the data source should show. The reason why no data is shown like in the table in the first column, is that no user ID has been chosen. I will shortly show how to choose a user ID. But first I will make a few adjustments to the just created table. You may have noticed the width of the heading and of the data cell. At the moment, the widths are automatically adjusted to the content. This fluidity can be annoying when choosing different users. To overcome this, all I need to do is give one of the table cells a fixed width. I select the heading cell of the first row and set its width to 25%. Then I go down to password. This data cell will contain a meaningless encrypted password. So, I remove the table row. The group data cell will contain a number representing the ID of the group. I need to change this so that it shows the name of the group. With the data cell selected, I go down to Dynamic Attributes and click on the Dynamic Data Picker button. In the pop-up, I click on the Formatter button. Here I want to say, if the group ID value is 1, then show user, if the value is 2 then show moderator, I'll show administrator. I right-click the data group, and in the drop-down menu I choose Operation. For the operator, I choose the double equal sign. For the value I enter, 1. I then right-click the value, and in the drop-down menu I choose ternary operation. The ternary operator, also known as the conditional operator, is the only operator that takes 3 operands: a condition followed by a question mark, then an expression to execute if the condition is true, followed by a colon, and finally the expression to execute if the condition is false. In this case, I will be using a nested ternary operator. I will leave a link below if you want to know more about ternary operators. For the first expression I enter user. For the second expression I enter a second condition. This time it is when the group ID equates to 2. I add the nested ternary operator and enter moderator for the second expression. The third expression becomes administrator. I close the dialogues and choose the next data cell. This is the status, and I use the same procedure to show active when the value of the status is 0 and archived when the value is 1. The last data cell needs to have the date formatted. Again I hit the Dynamic Data Picker and the Format button. I right-click the date and choose Data and Time. I go down to Format Date. Here I enter one of the more common data formats. But this can be Americanized if you prefer. When no user has been chosen, I want this table to be hidden from view. For this I choose the table and scroll down to Dynamic Attributes. Here I choose Display and Show. For when to show, I choose when the data detail has a value. The last step for the read function is to show the details table when a user is selected. For this, I select the row that contains the user's name. In the Properties panel, I select Dynamic Events. Here I attach a mouse on-click event. For the action I choose Data Detail and select. For the key value, I choose the user ID from the table repeat area. And close the dialogues. To highlight the selected user, I go to Dynamic Events and choose Styling and Class Toggle. I enter the name of the Bootstrap class for background color. The condition for when to show is when the user ID in the table row is the same as the user ID in the data detail. Having a blue background means that we need a light text color. I repeat the procedure for the background color for the text color. I save both of the files so that we can test what we have achieved so far. I hit the Open in Browser button to view the page in the browser. Here I add a new user. Then I select the new user to view the details. I would like to make an adjustment to the date format. I will do this outside of this video. And that is it for the first two functions. That is, the create and read functions. I had intended to continue with the last two functions. These are the update and delete functions. The problem is that this video has grown to a mammoth size. I will therefore continue this topic in the next video. I hope to see you there. Thank you for watching.